Okay, Andrew, do you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you. And Christian, are you okay to change the slides?
Yeah.
Can people see the slides?
Yeah, I can see them.
Good. Well, good afternoon, folks. And I'm going to talk about the wood pasture design that we've. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Can folks hear? Yeah. I'm going to talk about the wood pasture design that we've put in place in one part of the farm at this place called Fincastle. There's some stats for you on the farm. Things have changed since I did that slide slightly, and cattle numbers are up, sheep numbers are a bit down, but we're basically on this place and a bit of neighbouring ground, we're running 700 odd ewes, and this year I think we'll be calving down about 60 cows. Next slide, please. And when we took on the farm over from my uncle in the early 90s, we inherited 3 shelter belts on the farm, and jolly good ones there were too, and all the rest of it. So you might be thinking, why on earth did we not just stick with shelter belts? It's what the farming industry knows, well tried and tested. Why bother with wood pasture, which is the system that we, as I said, that we established? What's wrong with shelter belts? And I think it's worth spending a bit of time on that, because our thinking about shelter belts was the reason that we went into a wood pasture system. If you go on to the next slide, please. So here's a picture taken, I think, in the early 2000s of the top shelter belt, which you'd seen in the previous slide, and the middle one. And the new one we planted in 1994, when our mindset was still very much shelter belts were the way to go to add shelter to the farm. And if we then go on to the next slide, please. You'll see the third lower one on the farm, which was Scots pine. 2 of them were dominated by Scots pine. One was a spruce dominated one with larch and other stuff through it. All very conventional, and we all know landscapes which are stuffed full of shelter belts that look like that. Little mini plantations stuck like leeches on the side of a hill somewhere. So anyway, if we move on to the next slide, please. When wind blow started to take place, it hit us in the early 2000s, and eventually we had to fell the middle spruce shelter belt that you can see now there in that slide. So this was taken probably in the early mid-2000s or something. But we also lost in winds in the early 2000s the top part of that third shelter belt that we were looking at a bit earlier. And we realized that we had to replace these shelter belts. We were going to lose them. We were going to lose them all, and we didn't want to lose them. They were really a valuable asset. So, as I said, why did we bother with wood pasture? Why not just replace these shelter belts? Well, if we go on to the next slide. By the time we had into the early 2000s, we had very mixed views about shelter belts, pros and cons, and the cons were very much uppermost in our mind. So just quickly going over this slide, anyone who's in this audience as a farmer will be familiar with the fact that shelter belts are only designed to give shelter from wind. And the design of the shelter belt is all about breaking that wind, creating a barrier, creating low wind speed grazing environment for the sheep on the leeward side of the shelter belts. They are not designed to give top shelter and shade to animals. And yet, as we had opened up our shelter belts because the fences had all come down and we were too stingy and didn't have the resource to replace those fences, we realized that animals were choosing to use these shelter belts in all sorts of weather and all sorts of different situations, and not just for low wind, to graze in low wind speed conditions. So top shelter or shade was really important. And in winter time, sheep were using these shelter belts. In cold weather, they're so thermally sensitive animals that they choose, according to the temperature, they choose where to sleep, and whether they sleep in the open or they use trees depends on, to a large degree, on temperature. Wind speed as well, but temperature and wind speed is all connected. And then the third problem we were faced is we were having difficulty getting people to come in and manage them. They're too small, these shelter belts, and removed from roads and all the rest of it. And anyone who's tried to manage shelter belts in a traditional fashion will know what I mean. And then thirdly, the planting design, which is, as everyone knows, is they're just planted like mini plantations. These ones in the 1960s were where they don't encourage grass growth underneath the trees. And that seemed to us to be a missed opportunity, because we had come to realize that under a canopy of open trees, you get earlier grass growth, and early grass growth in the spring, where there's the frosts are reduced, you get a surge in spring grass, and spring grass is our limiting factor here from an agricultural productivity point of view. So all said and done, this was, we were really starting to think, God, there must be a better way to, rather than just replace these shelter belts with more shelter belts, there must be a better way to do it. So if we move on to the next slide, we realized that if we designed shelter belts so that animals could graze through them, then, or we might call these shelter woods, then we would get all the benefits of top shelter, and as well as the side shelter, which the traditional shelter belt gives us. And if we planted with species that would encourage grass growth and have an open, have a light canopy, so deciduous trees principally, we would encourage spring grass. And anyway, so we decided to give this a try. We also realized that by fact we weren't going to lose ground to these shelter belts, and not in the long run anyway, or the medium term. We could plant bigger areas, and we would just have an initial issue about managing the grazing animals outside of these little woodlands in the short term, until trees were big enough for us to get the animals into. And that freed us up in terms of what ground we were going to give up in the early stages anyway. And so we designed 7 hectares round that lower plantation that you were seeing in that picture. And 7 hectares, much more than you would plant for a normal shelter belt. But we were comfortable that we weren't going to lose the ground to the farm. And so we worked off a figure of a 60% canopy cover. That was the maximum we wanted to have in our woodland in this new sort of wood pasture system. And that was based on experience I'd seen of in Scandinavia, of where wood pasture systems, old wood pasture systems, are much more common. And we worked from a final crop of trees backwards. Instead of saying we'll start with 2,500 trees a hectare, the standard plantation model, we work back from what is the final crop that density of crop that we want, and we work back from that. And we settled on 70 trees a hectare as being roughly what we were aiming for at in an 8-row pattern. You can see the design I've written up here. So it was an 8-row pattern, and we planted 5 rows and left 3 open as grass alleys. We used a grant scheme at the time that was available, which the minimum density was 1,600 trees a hectare. Well, that is roughly 60% of 2,500. So it all kind of worked. We went for 3 inner rows of oak because we wanted to grow oak as a timber crop, very useful species. And there was a wee bit of history here because my forebears had grown oak in these areas for on a coppice system, and they had gone into disrepair, and there were only 2 or 3 trees left of that old system dating back a couple hundred years. And these grass alleys were augmented by rides, which we left open to make sure we could move animals to the gateways. You can move animals round. Animals need to know where they're moving and see a way forward. And also these rides and alleys were going to make access easy for quad bikes and etc., etc. And we orientated them north-south to maximize the light coming in. And that was the essence of the design. It was all, you can see a picture of it here in, I suppose, a few years after planting. And it was all fairly straightforward. We didn't think terribly much about it. The Forestry Commission people were a bit surprised. We did tell them exactly what we were doing. And they actually came to have a look at it because they were scratching their head, but they were so desperate for trees in the ground at the time that they ignored the fact we had flouted all the open ground rules, and were just basically happy to see trees in the ground. Different story now. Anyway, if we move on to the next slide, please, and I'll just rattle through these last slides. 2009, here it is, starting getting planted, and it was a mixture of semi-improved history of some improvement in grassland management terms and some rough grazings, some herb-rich bits which we left unplanted and we thought would be herb-rich and indeed were, but when grazing pressure came off. And the siting of these, we did 3 blocks totaling 7 hectares, were round that lower shelter belt and designed really so that they would enhance sheep behavior in what is a really important sheep wintering area for us. Next slide, please. 2013, it looked like that. Lots of rank grass. And this was a year before we first put sheep in. We put them in the autumn so that there would be less damage to trees. The leaves are less palatable, and we kept a very close eye on how they behaved. We got more confidence about it as in the next year. So that was it in 2013, as I said. Sheep went in 2014, if I remember right. Next slide, please. Then it started to look like that with an aerial photograph from a drone someone had given us, had taken. And then the same shot, if we move on to the next slide, in wintertime, 2019, I think, probably, something like that. This one particular bit we were looking at. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see this is what it looked like in about 3 years ago from the outside of the woodland. Just looks like an ordinary woodland, nothing terribly exciting about it. And 2022, we were starting to see the grass growth falling off a cliff as canopy closure took place. So we did a trial pollard of the one row of trees on the outer row of trees, leaving the inner oak rows. This had always been part of our plan. And that's what it looked like in 2022. We've now gone right through, or about half the woodland actually. And whereas we'd originally planned to use the timber for firewood, we've actually gone to chip the timber and it's gone into the cattle shed. So the chipped timber will be fermented and go on the fields as to augment the field fertility. If we come to the next slide, you can, in the next slide, please. Very quickly, this is the way we see it now. This as a kind of summary slide. It's been, we consider it really been a great success for us. We've been very happy with how the animals have behaved and performed, and how the trees have behaved and performed, and actually how the field layer has responded to being opened up by that coppicing or that pollarding, low pollards. So this is a very traditional agroforestry model, but it does depend on being willing to thin and manage the trees. Otherwise, it would become a conventional woodland. We had also thought that there would be benefits to the carbon for the farm carbon balance. And if you go on to the next slide, I won't spend time on this, but we took some figures from data that had been a paper that had been produced by a chap, Mike Cannell, in Forest Research. I think he worked at ITE. Anyway, he had come up with these figures for what oak at 60% canopy cover at yield class 6, which is actually pretty much what the oak here is performing at. So we based some figures on that as to what the carbon sequestration might be on the farm if we took an average performance across all the woodlands that were grazed on the farm. And if you look at the next slide, we reckoned that it would something about a third of our total emissions could be balanced by some sequestration from this wood pasture. And therefore, if we expanded the wood pasture, we might get to net zero. But there's a big but here. Actually, colleagues of ORC, I think, at doing an agroforestry code, worked out a much, much lower figure for the sequestration in these oak woodlands. So there's a big question mark in my head about how viable as a carbon sequestration route this is. I think there's technical reasons which we won't go into now why you see two very different figures. One suggesting a sequestration rate of 1/4 of a ton of carbon dioxide per hectare, as opposed to 6 or something, which I averaged over the rotation. But anyway, regardless of what we make of the carbon side of things, if we go to the next slide, in conclusion, or almost in conclusion, for us, farming with trees, this is what it means, and we're very comfortable with it. We think we could see quite a bit more of the farm in such systems, and are currently starting a pine, rowan, birch one on much poorer ground on peaty podzels, and I think that would be something that Pete would probably be interested in. And the final slide, it's a picture of the farm. My uncle planted a Sitka spruce plantation in the 1960s behind the farm. You can see it there. And this model of wood pasture, we think, is an alternative to getting trees on the ground. It's still part of the farm, and it's not to say it should replace the Sitka spruce model, but it is an alternative, we think, a viable alternative for folks who are in rough grazings, upland situations. I think that's enough for me. I hope I haven't overrun my welcome or time. Thanks very much.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. I've certainly got plenty of notes, and I'm sure other people have as well. Fab. So yes, I see there's a few things in the chat, so we'll get to those after Kat's done her presentation. Okay, Kat, you should be able to share your screen now, I think. Fab. Okay, that seems to be working.
Hello. Is it? Sorry, this is the first time I've done this through Teams, and my computer's a bit old and slow. Is it showing up?
Yep, we can see it.
Oh, okay, brilliant.
Yeah, let you take it away then.
Right. So, hello everybody. I'm Catherine. I have a little farm up in the Highlands. I'm sort of at the almost opposite end than Andrew, in that I've started planting trees in the last few years. I've only been here for 5 years. So yes, all my trees are still very small. Well, some of them are getting bigger. But just to give you a bit of a background, this is where I am. So I am sort of just over the ridge from the Great Glen, so we do get the southwesterly breeze hitting us pretty hard sometimes. Sort of the farm at a glance is it's sort of between 300 and 350 metres, so sort of verging on upland. It's almost 70 acres, mostly sheep. I have about 200 at the moment, but I'm looking to decrease numbers a bit. I also have ducks and geese. This was an old shealing site, and before that it was sort of a deep peat harvesting area. So lots of acidic, wet, peaty glaze, semi-improved grassland, a few burns around and about, lots of seepages and springs in the wet season, and yeah, very exposed. So this is just a rough sort of plan of what I'm dealing with. The orange is the blanket bog with some deep peat left in there. The yellow is more sort of wet heath, rough grazing. The blue is all water of various types, and the purples are the wind. We do get hit from the north and the east sometimes, but it is mostly southwest. As I said, yes, very, very wet in a lot of areas. When I got here, there was a little bit of natural regen on a little mound behind the shed, mainly Scots pine, lodgepole, bit of broom and gorse, and some juniper and rowan. But other than that, around the farm, there is mostly Sitka seeding, because I'm surrounded by lots of plantation or old plantation. So I do spend a bit of time pulling those out. My long-term vision is to increase the diversity of habitats and within habitats, and using different sorts of agroforestry to do that, but also keeping in mind the livestock and the landscape health and wildlife, and to try and sort of manage the water that we have quite a lot of a bit better as well. So I've been very lucky that when I started farming, I was on a little city farm, which meant that I had a salary and it was all very small scale and we could do lots of playing about. So I sort of have had the privilege of seeing how animals interacted with trees in this very small scale, sort of no pressure from making money sort of setting, and it just really it really made me think about how so many fields are without any sort of trees, and how I didn't want to farm in that way. So the main things that I like from the trees is the fodder and the nutrients, allowing the stock to self-medicate, and provide shelter, as Andrew said, not just from the wind but also from the sun and the rain and the snow. Allow them to do lots of scratching and nibbling with lichen, to improve the soil health, and increase the water health as well. There's a lot of work around here going on about increasing the health of the rivers, because the water's getting too hot for the salmon and lots of other things. So trying to, when the water is still in little burns in the uplands, keep it cool, not let it warm up before it gets to the river. And I do have a goal of, we're getting some beavers in the local loch, hopefully, and I would like to tempt them up here eventually if I have enough trees near the burn. And also providing lots of food and forage and shelter for the wildlife as well. This is the evidence of the hare pottering around the hedge in the snow, doing a bit of trimming as well. And also foraging for me. I think, we don't eat enough wild food, so I'd like to increase that in my diet as well. we have got sort of thin, nutrient poor soils here. So when I think about what trees to plant, I have thought about the minerals that I'd like, which is mainly selenium, cobalt and copper. Also thinking about fluke and worm burdens and what will do okay in the conditions that we have. Also thinking about the sort of the trees that need more of a help in Scotland, and yeah, seeing what is round and about doing well. So I have mostly gone for things that will do well, things that will meet my needs and cope with the conditions. And I have been, these are some homegrown hazels, and we have some hazelwoods at the bottom of the hill. I did try to get some funding when I first got here, but it was not very forthcoming. I sort of, I don't know, dropped through a loophole or something in the Woodland Trust. So I just decided to get on and do something, because that was the thing I was really keen to get started on. But it has meant that I used my savings and I've now run out of money, and I'm sort of struggling to carry on doing things. But it did mean the good point of that was that I was sort of free to experiment a little bit and not be tied to the conditions of grants. But yeah, if I had saved that money and used it as sort of my portion of grant funding, I probably could have done a bit more. But it meant I could get things in the ground my first winter here, so which was really motivating to me. My initial plans when I first got here were quite extensive. There was the sort of darker green here is trees, and then the sort of lighter green is more natural regen. So I'd wanted to do a sort of woodland pasture scheme over most of the farm, but in different formats, in a sort of copse structure and more of a parkland structure, and then the sort of lanes like Andrew had on his slides. My plans have changed quite a lot, mainly because I've been here a few years now. I've watched what happens, and there's a few things that I need to be a bit more considerate of. So in the bottom left corner, where I've put lots of trees and hedges, is actually a black grouse lek in the spring. So I need to be careful not to sort of close that in too much, and also consider the waders that are here too. So, but that first winter, I figured that things that wouldn't really change is shelter belts for the wind and a perimeter hedge. So that's what I sort of got on with doing. It was focused mainly on the sort of east side of the farm, where like my shed and my house now are, so it was all a bit easier to get to. And I did start planting an orchard as well that first year, and a little coppice just at the very front of the farm. We do struggle with the wind. I have not had much fruit off the trees because it mostly blows off before it's ripe. But we're getting there. The coppice that I planted is just for mainly for fuel for the house, and also for sort of timber material. And quite a lot of them are doing really well. Some of them are loads taller than me now, but some of them are growing much more slowly. There is a bit of nibbling from the deer. And then the perimeter hedge, I planted a few different types of trees. So I had some quite big bare roots, and they're really getting away, and it's really satisfying to see. But I also planted lots of smaller bare roots as well. We did have a bit of nibbling from the hare that first winter, so some of them are still quite small. This was them in their first, well, sort of spring, summer. And then this is the big bare roots now, so they're enormous and bearing lots and lots of fruit and seeds. And then this is the small bare roots that were yeah, getting there slowly. But the one in the bottom right hand corner where the little ducklings are, they quite a few of them aren't really much bigger than they were that first year. So we'll see what happens there. The shelter, I planted 2 shelter belts. This one was on quite a dry slope, and I did plant them a bit late in the winter, and then it was a really dry spring. So they have taken quite a while to get going. I experimented with some different mulches and did find that the voles were quite a big problem. The ones that are doing the best now are actually the ones I didn't mulch at all, just left in the grass. So it's slightly depressing. So this, the ones on the left, the tall ones where the telegraph pole is, they're the ones I didn't mulch at all. And then you can see my geese grazing in amongst the trees in the summer when they're little. And there's also the hare does still like to come and trim, particularly the broom. It seems to really like, but yeah, does still visit the shelter belt. And the other shelter belt was just a classic not really knowing my ground well enough before I did something. So there are a lot of deer that run through that bit of ground. So there's a few trees, but really not very many. There's a few that are trying to carry on sprouting from the base, but yeah, there's been a lot of damage. So I did have a year off because there was a lot of trees to plant, and I just needed a bit of a break. But the next winter I started planting the wood pasture, and that was in the field just near the house. I planted those in tubes because I wanted to carry on grazing in there, not all the time, but sort of occasionally. This field I'm managing is a sort of wildflower meadow, so I usually graze it pretty hard in the winter. Sort of give it a little nibble in the spring and then leave it for the summer. I have found that so the trees are largely doing pretty well. I did mulch them quite generously with lots of poo, which the birds really enjoyed picking through once the worms had got in. The geese do graze around them as well. But when the sheep are in there, I do have problems with the sheep climbing up the stakes, nibbling the tops. I've got a few pom-pom trees. Also the wind, when they get up out of their little greenhouse tube, then they all of a sudden get battered by the wind. And the sheep scratch on the posts and are constantly breaking cable ties and putting the tubes over. They also, obviously, the grass grows really well up the tubes as well. And I found weirdly that if you get like a caterpillar in the tube and it can't get out, then it just really does a lot of damage. So particularly the hazels have really not done very well with the caterpillars in there. And I also planted a little willow strip along a field drain. That's doing okay. I found I was a bit slow to realise which willows would actually grow well from cuttings. I thought they all did, but not all the ones I put in have. So yeah, it took the sort of 3 goes before they really started growing. And then last winter, I did a bit more wood pasture work, and that was putting trees in a more sort of parkland structure down the bottom of the field near the burn, and also on a sort of rocky, craggy bit behind my shed. They are not doing well at all. I put the sheep in too soon, and the stakes just weren't sort of sturdy enough once the grass had started growing. And also I thought I was being really clever because I decided to put less thick stakes on them so the sheep couldn't climb up, but actually they can still climb up and they snap quite easily when the sheep really rub on them. So yeah, that planting wasn't particularly successful, so I'm going to try again with some changes. I really went for it with the sort of species of trees that I was putting in. You know, not all Scottish natives, but partly just to see what does well, and bearing in mind that our climate will be changing and how to be more resilient to that. I do try and collect seeds and grow my own little trees, which I haven't been brilliant at recently. Also, it's weirdly, I can't seem to get birch or alder to germinate for me, which seems strange. But one of the other reasons I decided to plant loads and loads of different species, sort of when I was buying the plants, is that I thought then I'd have a seed source at some point for most of those species once I could see which ones were doing well. So that was my thinking. I am also trying to bear in mind the understory, getting wild garlic and comfrey and currants and raspberries in, as well as some wildflowers, sort of as the hedges get bigger. This is my little tree nursery. And then this winter, I have managed to get some funding through the Woodland Trust, hopefully, and we're going to be putting a hedge through the wood pasture field just below my house, which is mainly just to start splitting the fields up to a bit smaller, so I can have a better grazing rotation even in the winter, and also because it's a really soggy field to try and manage the water in there as well. But I do still need to find funding for the fences. I've learned quite a few lessons. Yeah, I tried to plant way too many trees that first winter, and I let some of them dry out a bit, and I was a bit late getting some of them in, which did definitely impact them. Plugs just don't seem to do very well here for me, and also I hear people saying that you shouldn't plant the young trees in the sort of dockens and nettles and thistle patches, but actually I've mostly found that they seem to do really well, because the other people, like other animals, don't see them. And yeah, my notes were particularly helpful when I was writing this presentation. But yeah, good to look back on and see what I was thinking as well. What I want to do is loads more hedges on contour. I'm going to try using this picture has sort of 2 stakes and some wire around it. The Woodland Trust guy was saying if you put 2 stakes in and wrap some old stock wire around, he knows somebody that's protecting their trees quite well doing that from sheep when they're grazing around them. So I'm going to try that and carry on with my silver pasture efforts. Do some more riparian planting and regen, and get some more willow in the ground, be better at my tree nursery, and do more understory planting, and carry on with my Sitka removal. So this is a sort of vague map of where I'm going. I haven't planned to put anything in the areas where the black grouse left over on the west side. I think I'll just see how that develops. And yeah, at some point I would like to try doing some proper like tree lanes with some sort of water pipes along one of the hedges, so that I can mob graze the sheep a bit easier. I would eventually like to have most of the pasture within 50 metres of trees and hedge, because I've read that that is sort of the limit to the benefit that the trees can give the grass. Lay the hedges, feed the sheep lots of tree fodder, but also have loads of wildlife. Have the option for green barns in bad weather on that dry slope. Yeah, have lots of deadwood and brash and scratching branches, and be able to rotationally graze the sheep in the winter without needing electric fencing, because it doesn't. My solar chargers don't do well here in the winter, as well as providing lots of things for us, for the house and for dyeing my wool. And yeah, I don't want to I don't want the farm not to be wet. I do embrace the wetness of the ground here and what it gives to lots of waders. So just not to forget that. That's me.
Thank you very much. I'm really struck by the kind of diversity and range of different kind of planting used there. Quite impressive in some ways. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or just raise your hand. But I thought I'd start off myself, rather selfishly. I suppose just ask if you kind of started from scratch again with your planting, and this is for both kind of Andrew and Kat, what would be kind of the main thing or the main couple of things you would maybe change about what you've done in the past compared to what you do now? Kat, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I suppose. Well, like I was saying with the shelter battle I planted, I just planted it in the wrong place because I didn't realise that was where the deer ran. So there's that sort of really wanting to get going, but not really having had the time to observe what happens on the farm first. But saying that, I'm really pleased I did get the perimeter hedging really quickly, because it really, like, seeing that get big and all the birds in it and all of the fruit is really motivating to be like, oh, you know, actually, it doesn't feel like I planted it that long ago, but it's massive now. So I think, yeah, I guess go for like something that's going to be high impact initially, maybe, just to like really feel like you've done something good. But if you think that, yeah, that sort of observation, I definitely should have had a bit more time before I did some things.
Andrew?
Hello, sorry, I'm just turning my mic on. I think for me, I would change the species mix a bit. And in the system that we did here, we had these outer rows. We had the inner rows of oak. I wouldn't change that for where you can grow oak. To my mind, is an excellent way of growing oak if you're looking for some timber. It's a traditional forestry approach. But the outer rows, I would have planted more willow. Now I know I'm chipping, and I'm going to run these low pollards like cattle lollipops, if you like, so they get topiaried, and I'll be very happy with that. I would have planted more palatable. I would have planted less hornbeam, and the reason I planted quite so much hornbeam on the outer rows is I was quite influenced by the European oak hornbeam models, where hornbeam was it's a very important fuel wood. I think I was also influenced by the fact we had a population explosion of hawfinch at the time. Hornbeam and hawfinch kind of go together. So it was pretty whimsical, you might say. I would now plant more willow. I would even think about sycamore, which you wouldn't normally think of as an agroforestry species because of the dense shade, but as a pollard or a coppice species, and highly palatable leaves. So if you're thinking that way, so my mind has changed rather, and I would probably also have planted more holly. Again, a good palatable species in that kind of low pollard system. So I think that's the main thing I would do different. Definitely, yeah.
Fab. Peter, you have a question?
Well, a couple of questions, a couple of points really. Catherine, I'm sorry you weren't in Cumbria, because I'd have been knocking on your door, flogging you trees from day one. We're really trying to support young people, entrant farmers coming in on the agroforestry thing. And I have to say, Woodland Trust are now doing more agroforestry, and it's definitely coming up our agenda. Finally, thankfully. So I'm sorry you weren't in Cumbria, because we would have been there with you. I do think people should not worry about making mistakes. Every farm is different. All the soils are different at some level. Your aspects different. Your outcomes are different. I think you should carry on making mistakes, because we learn from mistakes. It's unfortunate when you have to do things twice, and that is a shame. But I would say start off with really good quality bare root stock. So try and go for 60-40 stock if you can, at the minimum. There's obvious species which will take really, really well, like alder and willow. We use a huge amount of willow pegs in the uplands, and willow pegging's such a delightful thing because it's cheap. Go and cut your local willow down, coppice it, bang it in the ground. As long as it's wet, it'll take, and it's such a good material for stock. I suppose my questions really were things like, Andy, when you've got, we often see sheep in our fields in Cumbria on set stocked, i.e. very tight grazed grass. You're putting sheep into woodlands with very tall grass that's not been grazed for several years. How do they fare, and do they like it, or is it a bit of a, do they kick off at you?
Is that for me? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that picture you saw, and that system at Fincastle, when we planted it, we kept the sheep out for 5 years. So by that time, it was really tall, rank grass. But if I'd taken a picture the next year, that grass was way back down. The sheep had completely taken that down. Normally they wouldn't, they would trample on an awful lot of it, but we run a rotational grazing system, and that is absolutely key to avoiding damage. Compare that with a set stock system where you will get damage, and that's true for whether it's cattle or for sheep. So rotational grazing is a really important part of the story, and I'm glad you mentioned that.
Thank you.
In the chat, there's a quick question from Julia. Is there a trade-off between tree planting and food production from the sheep or cattle? So if there is a trade-off, how do you balance that?
Well, for us, yes, of course, there's a trade-off, and particularly if you're excluding ground for a few years like we did, you're going to have there's a trade-off there. And obviously, the bigger the farm, the easier it is to manage round areas that you've excluded. Much more difficult for a small unit. And for us, we, if I remember right, we had moved to a rotational grazing system, and that actually is a more efficient way to use grass. And that had allowed us to take areas out of production temporarily. We really missed it in the spring, where it was really quite difficult in the spring, I remember. But we didn't actually reduce numbers, if I remember correctly, but we just managed a bit differently. Much more difficult on a small place, absolutely.
Kat, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, my trees are all quite small, so I guess I haven't really got that experience to speak of. I know that the hedges that have been tall enough that I've been able to harvest willow and sort of, tree for fodder for the sheep, they've really benefited from. So I guess it's, it depends what trade-off you mean. Like, I would love to not have to pump my sheep full of minerals artificially. So for me, then if they could get the minerals from the trees, I would see that as only a benefit, really, even if there's a bit less grass. But also, like, we have such a short growing season for grass here, that I think actually the trees can help, especially the sort of early spring, with a bit of shelter, and also in drought as well. Like, there'll be situations where the grass grows less under the trees, but then there'll be situations where it grows more. So I guess it just depends on your conditions and situation. But yeah, I can't imagine I'll be cursing the trees at any point soon.
Jim, do you have a question?
Hi there, thank you. Yeah, Jim O'Neill. I'm in not far away from Pete, actually, in Cumbria, so Forestry Commission England. Question mostly for Andrew, although some of the questions have already touched on some of this anyway. Andrew, I'm just aware that we probably try to get too many things out of our tree planting designs, and you've got perhaps what you'd call an older style shelter belt that was probably planted to get timber from it as well. Would you do that again, or would you go for a narrower belt, which might be better shelter? You've got lots and lots of really good science on shelter belts and design. And would you do that, or has the green barn usage been so good that you would do that again?
Absolutely, the green barn, the living shed, whatever whatever phrase you want. It's so important from animal behavior point of view, and it was the animal behavior which drove us down to a wood pasture system, and that meant that you could put bigger areas into that because we weren't going to lose them from the farm. I would never ever plant something just as a windbreak type, unless it's a thick hedgerow type of thing, fine. But even with a thick hedgerow, I would widen them out to put in some trees which would allow animals to get in under the shade. And that is going to become so important. I can't believe farms who are not planning for that, just from an animal behavior, animal welfare point of view.
Great. Thank you, Andrew.
Fab. Well, as we're kind of coming to the end, near 2 o'clock, we'll finish off with just some, I suppose, thoughts and future plans that we want to, ORC wants to kind of develop with this Living Lab going forward. Julia, are you happy to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So yeah, I'm one of the team here at ORC that's running this Living Lab in the north of England, and it's been really great, the level of interest in the Living Lab. I'm not sure how many of you even know what it is. I guess if you're on this call, you must be on our mailing list, I guess, although I'm not 100% sure. There might have been some people passed on the invite. If you're not on our Living Lab newsletter mailing list yet, let us know. Maybe we could send, I don't know if you know, Christian, if everyone here is on it already, or if we should send the link out maybe to people that have attended today. So they can join the mailing list. So we put out a newsletter every couple of months with just general information on what's going on in agroforestry, especially in the north of England, but policy stuff as well. There's been lots of interesting announcements recently from DEFRA on big money for agroforestry. So if you're in England, that's something you might probably you're probably looking at. But the idea of the Living Lab is really to have a group of people, a community of practice where we share learnings. And so we're kind of very open to what the people in the Living Lab want to do. So we've had a couple of meetings, farm walk last year. We have this workshop, and we're now thinking about what to do in the spring and summer. So I'd be really interested to hear from people now or after this call about what sort of topics you think are really hot right now. I don't know if anyone has any that's just on the tip of their tongue they could put into the chat, and maybe that's about how to interpret that English Sustainable Farming Incentive news that came out last week. I know I'm wondering what the difference between low, medium, and high density is, but maybe someone on the call knows that. So yeah, that's one thing. I think it'd be great if we could do another farm visit, farm walk in the spring. So it really depends on what sort of topics people are interested in, where we might go for that. But again, so let us know if there's any hot topics you're interested in. I'm just having a look in the chat if anyone's putting anything. No one's put anything in yet. Yeah, I'm just wondering about that because we don't actually have a list, do we, Christian, of who's attended today? That's my concern with if we want to follow up with an email to the group today.
Well, I'm just about to put in chat the link to the flyer we have, which kind of summarizes what the Living Lab is about. And at the bottom of that flyer is a link to the newsletter. So as we go forward, and as Julia mentioned, as we hopefully have more events, whether like this or more in-person meetups, if it's kind of something you're interested in, helping support, I suppose just spreading the word about agroforestry, particularly in the north of England, but the more the merrier, really. And yeah, we'll share all of our kind of work and sort of projects through the newsletter there.
Yeah, and just one concrete thing that is going on within this. It's a European project called REFOREST, actually, that sort of supports us in this work. That project involves a lot of modeling. So there is one particular model called Farm Tree, which is quite user-friendly and useful, that Will, who's not on the call today, is kind of our lead on. And he's been doing some of this modeling with some of the farms we've been working more closely with in the Living Lab. And it simulates all kinds of outcomes, including economic outcomes. We'll have to update it with new payments for agroforestry in England. Carbon capture, like Andrew was talking about, it also simulates carbon capture. Who knows how accurate that is, but it'll give you an estimate of that. So he's been doing some scenarios with some of the existing members of our labs, of this Living Lab, on their farms. So if anyone's interested in that, you could get in touch and we could look at whether we could set up some scenarios in Farm Tree for you to get some ideas of what might happen for different outcomes, profits, tree production, all those sort of different things we want to monitor, and all the multiple benefits from agroforestry systems. So yeah, that's about it for what we're doing right now.
Yep, fantastic. Well, as it's just past 3, I think we'll call it there. So this has been recorded, so we'll share this through the newsletter as well, so people can refer back to it if they want to double check anything, or for those that have missed it, we'll be able to catch up. But yes, other than just thanking our 2 speakers for presenting the work, is really interesting, and yes, I think we'll leave it there. So thank you very much, everyone.